Greetings, everyone, and welcome to We Are ACEDS, streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Mike Quartararo. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we will be joined momentarily by the head of product at Hanzo. Hanzo, of course, is a pioneering technology company that has developed a cloud-based platform for legal compliance governance teams. And their product captures dynamic and collaborative data and web-based data sources for use in litigation, in investigations, regulatory inquiries, and whatever else you may need to capture data for. You can learn, of course, more about Hanzo at hanzo.co. Hanzo has been an affiliate partner of ACEDS for several years. We're so proud to collaborate with them on a number of different presentations, and for 3 years on our benchmarking survey related to collaboration data. There have been some developments at Hanzo, and we're so happy to promote the good news to the eDiscovery community and chat with them about it. Dave, welcome to We Are ACEDS Live. Thanks so much for making time for us today.
Good morning, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I hope you are well.
I am well as well. Thank you.
Dave, let's start with, for those who may not know, a little bit about you and your role at Hanzo.
Sure, excellent. So yeah, I started in the legal industry way back in 2009. And I really started working with some Midwest LSPs. That's kind of the base of knowledge where I started. Kind of the day in, day out indexing of data and all of that good stuff. And I then transitioned over as a product manager at a company called Eureka Software, and I worked there for 5 years. And that company was really focused on, endpoint detection and collection of data from endpoints. So, that was obviously it still is a need that a lot of people have. But I worked there for 5 years, and then I actually moved to Portland, Oregon, which is where I am now. And I worked in the legal hold space as well as data breach management notification as well before I joined Hanzo in 2020 as a senior product manager and now head of product.
Awesome.
Yep.
Let's jump in. There's some recent news at Hanzo. Hanzo has announced that it's renaming Hanzo Hold to Hanzo Illuminate. First, tell us what is or was Hanzo Hold, and then
Sure.
And then explain the reasoning behind the rebrand. What's different? What's new? Tell us why Hanzo is doing this.
Sure. So we started kind of as a single collection tool focused primarily on Slack, going back. So we're actually an older company than kind of the Slack. We had a dynamic capture product, and we were, I think 11 years old as a company. So we had a product line and still have a product line called Dynamic Capture. But the Hanzo Hold product was kind of a typical eDiscovery tool, really focused on Slack. And as we continue to grow over the last 2 years, we're adding more data sources, more functionality to the system, and we felt it was time to move away from kind of the hold moniker, where you're kind of classically put in boxes with legal hold products and things like that. And so we wanted to move away from that notion of being just that collection and hold tool for Slack, and thus we rebranded ourselves, and we've rebranded that product as Illuminate. And obviously, in the eDiscovery marketplace, it's hard to come up with new names and innovative names. So we didn't want to be Discovery, this or that, because it's obviously used almost everywhere now. So the marketing team came up with Illuminate. I think it's a really great term for the product, for really what we're doing, illuminating information and illuminating insight and intelligence on the data that does get collected in. So we've added a lot of new functionality into the system, continue to do so. So more data sources, obviously, added Google Workspace. We just announced a partnership with Asana as a data source as well. So bringing that into the data source, and then also extending the platform out into intelligence capabilities as well. So a new day, a new brand, and a lot more functionality. And so that's kind of where we landed in renaming the product.
And it moves, Dave, if I understand correctly, it moves beyond just eDiscovery. Right? I mean, eDiscovery, we think of eDiscovery as just, sort of that litigation space, but obviously the eDiscovery processes translate really well into other areas, whether they're legal or just internal investigations. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And you find out fairly quickly once you install a system that there are a lot more stakeholders in a company, in an enterprise, than just the eDiscovery team or legal team. And so whenever you place a tool in that has kind of unprecedented access to information, naturally there are other people, other teams that want to be able to use a tool like that. So we end up seeing IT and HR staff, internal investigation teams at larger enterprises, who are also interested in the tool, because you know what? They don't have great access to some of the data sources that we're able to capture. And so giving them that access and control over the information is really important to them. And so it moves beyond, in some places, it moves beyond eDiscovery in a really quick manner.
Yeah, it was always fascinating to me. I spent many years at law firms implementing e-discovery tools, and it was always fascinating to me to have stakeholders come to me and say, I could use that for this, and I can use this for that. And all of a sudden, people were fascinated by the use of different technologies.
Yeah, we've heard teams who were like, that someone finds out eventually that
Yeah,
eDiscovery team can, collect Slack data. And all of a sudden we find out that there's an internal investigation that happens, and they're like, hey, we need to talk to the eDiscovery folks on that team, because I know they can go to Slack, and I know they have information in Google Workspace and other places. So it becomes one of these, hey, did you hear? And
yeah.
then it ends up becoming somewhat of a burden sometimes on the eDiscovery teams, because now you're collecting data for all kinds of different internal teams. But that's okay, once they, are able to maybe give them access to our system, give them login access, and let them create their own matters. Now you're sharing that capability across, multiple internal teams, which is really great.
Yeah. So Dave, I want to just dig in a little bit so people really understand. There's a sort of a data mapping feature in the software, and there's this new feature that Hanzo is calling Spotlight Search.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you explain to the audience what those two features are? I mean, I understand the data mapping piece is really just API mapping, right?
Yeah, so there's kind of two things that we have. There's maybe what you're referring to is what's called dynamic mapping.
Yeah.
Um, and dynamic mapping is a feature that we have on Illuminate. And we've had this really since our Slack product came into being. And that dynamic map is incredibly critical to those folks who are connected to an API to Slack. And that dynamic map is essentially giving you an entire user list from Slack. So all your users can be selected, but at the same time, we're mapping all the relationships between individual users and the channels, private messages, or direct messages that they're associated with. So what ends up happening is there's a we call it kind of a low touch on the API to basically build a map of all your users and their connections to each other, to other sources, to even Slack Connect, which is two companies, talking through Slack or communicating through Slack. So that is the dynamic map strategy that we have in Hanzo Illuminate, and that's really unique to us, because it gives people the insight before you actually go collect messages
Mm.
on what you're participating in. So I would know if you and Serena or Deja were participating in multi-party direct messages, or if you were communicating with a company outside of your company. So that is the dynamic mapping strategy that we've had in play, and we just continue to grow the technology behind that and the intelligence behind that as well.
And Spotlight Search, Dave, is that something like can I sort of get a preview, or do I have to actually collect and then use search?
So Spotlight Search is in the product, and we right as it stands today, Mike, you have to collect data into Illuminate. And so the idea is, I'll rewind a little bit and kind of give you a background on Spotlight Search. We were hearing from a lot of prospects last year about DLP solutions. as part of, it's kind of a natural conversation that you're having when you're talking about Slack. And people do equate us with DLP simply because we're touching the API. We're able to grab data from the API. So we started hearing this more and more. And so I was a senior product manager. As a product manager, you hear that once, you're like, okay, let's consider it. You hear it 5 or 6 times within a couple months. You start, your ears perk up and you're like, I think I need to start looking into this and figuring out what's going on. So I started doing some investigation late last year. It's almost a year ago. And I discovered a company called Nightfall DLP. And Nightfall was kind of a classic DLP. They are a classic DLP company. They're sitting in Slack. They have Google Workspace, Salesforce, a lot of different connection sources. So we actually began talking with them around October of last year, early October of last year. And what interests me about Nightfall was not only that DLP solution, Mike, but was the fact that they decoupled their PII, their detection rules. They decoupled that from a pure DLP source, and they created an API, a developer API. And so for me, we were looking at being able to augment the type of information that we capture into Hanzo. And so I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel, even though we have a data science team, right? What we did not have with the data science team was classic PII, PHI detection, secrets, tokens, things like that would be detected. So I reached out to Nightfall and we started having a conversation. And so what we did was we partnered with Nightfall. And the Spotlight search is the ability for us to basically route incoming information through that pipeline to augment the information with PI detection, PHI detection, token secrets, that type of information. So we get out of the box, we get over 75 different detections that then a user inside of Hanzo, and you had talked about, maybe not just eDiscovery, but other areas of businesses like internal investigation teams or IT, being able to find this type of information because as email continues to become less relevant inside companies and people using more collaborative data, of course, people are trading up information that they should not be trading up in things like Slack. And so our capability inside Spotlight Search is to go pinpoint that information and find it as quickly as possible. So that is Spotlight Search, and we're able to look for credit cards and social security numbers and all that stuff. And really, at the end of the day, it's all about what do you do with that information. So, in the case of Hanzo, that information may be suppressed from moving forward. You may not want to trade that up with the next party if you're exporting data. You may also want to alert IT staff or HR staff that, hey, so-and-so is doing something that they shouldn't do. We've told them not to trade credit card information, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can create a report and then talk to HR or IT staff and maybe, do some retraining of custodians, et cetera, around that.
And I could think of, you rattled off a few, but I could think of a dozen use cases without really devoting a lot of energy.
Yeah, the real key to us there, Mike, was the real-time capability, which a lot of clients ask for, that real-time DLP capability, which is available inside Slack. And so we partner with Nightfall on the DLP side of things. But also, if you think about it, having the same technology available inside Hanzo. So if you did deploy DLP and Hanzo, we have the exact same technology working in two places. So now you don't have two competing technologies saying, oh, that's PII, and another one's going, no, that's not PII, which can happen when you're looking at data in one place and then trying to use a different model and different AI in a different place. They can compete with each other. We have it's a one-to-one. So if people are using Hanzo and collecting data, we can discover the information the exact same way that would be alerted on in DLP.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's pivot to some trends you're seeing. We collaborate on this survey, this collaboration data survey. And for anyone who doesn't know, the link should be available there. If you haven't taken the survey, please do. And we'll get a report out in the very near future. But let's talk a little bit about trends, Dave, in the creation and management of data. What are you seeing let me ask this way. How has the shift to remote and or hybrid work environments changed how people are collaborating?
Well, I think it goes without saying that I think it's been a profound shift.
Yeah.
And it's of course, everyone talks about COVID. It was, the trend had already started, but COVID obviously just accelerated it. It's on a ramp, that is kind of unbelievable. And so, the tools like Teams and Slack have just exploded because, let's be honest, in many ways, they're much better ways in which to collaborate. It took kind of the old guard of email and just kind of it throws it off, throws it away and moves it over to a much easier, simpler um, way in which to collaborate with teammates. If you think about Teams and Slack, certainly it's much easier. Those companies have obviously done so much on those platforms to make it easier for people to collaborate on information. Lots of third-party applications that are there and available for you. You want to put a Google Doc into Slack, bam, just drag and drop and put it in. And so they've made it really easy to collaborate on those platforms. And I think it's, we've seen this explosion over the last 2 years of the collaboration platforms.
And I think this is, I mean, we talk about it all the time. Obviously, we do webinars on this, but I think this has resulted in some new and sort of previously unknown forms of data that could be relevant to a legal matter. Obviously you're seeing that. What does that data look like, and how are you advising your customers, your clients, to manage that data?
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely true. I mean, if you think about those platforms, there's a lot more that is preserved and saved in the platforms than just an email and a chain, right? I mean, you're now talking about preserving, collecting, producing not only the original message, but all of the edits, all the deletes that go along with it, the threads, the inline threads with that information, the attachments that go along with it. You think about huddles, video, audio content. Um, those platforms contain a lot more information, all kind of really compressed. And so a lot of those forms, as you will, are in play now, and they're actually preserved and saved, and tool sets are able to go get that information. So when you think you can delete a file or delete a message or edit messages, we're able to capture all that information, and it becomes more relevant. It's certainly more conversational. You're able to look at what was going on with the conversations, how people deleted things, how people edited things. So it's just grown and grown and grown away from just your classic email and a thread within an email, into a lot more of those forms. And once I think legal knows it's all available, it becomes more relevant to them, because it's what you said, it's how you edited it, it's when you deleted it, timeframes, all of that becomes even more important to building cases.
So one of the things that obviously eDiscovery professionals, our listeners, I would hope, one of the things they're most clearly focused on is identifying and then preserving relevant data. Is the result of these new forms of data that we're now seeing, has that altered how eDiscovery professionals approach these important tasks of identifying and preserving data?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact is that many realize that even if today their collaborative data isn't called upon, or it doesn't seem to be relevant yet, a lot of them are understanding that in a short matter of time, it's going to be called upon. It's going to be relevant to the conversation. As you begin to see, especially startup companies, Mike, they don't have a email first mentality at all.
Right.
And so they're basically starting like, where are we starting? We're starting on Teams. We're starting on Slack. They start right from the get-go with a collaborative platform like Teams or Slack, and so the tool sets that they need are super important to them, especially in the discovery world, when you have to go collect this information, because all of your collaboration, all your communication is happening in those areas. And so they're realizing that, hey, even though maybe right now it's not relevant. I talked to a company on Monday, and they're like, we asked them, the big question was, how many matters have you done? How many Slack collections have you done? And they said, well, we haven't done that many, but the last one we did was an absolute nightmare to try to pull off. And so they said, we know as this year and into next year continues, we're going to have a lot more call upon these data sources to have to produce this information. And they said, we don't want that nightmare. We need a tool that's going to make this a lot easier for us. And so that was the reason they were talking to us.
Hmm. Hey, Dave, I have a question, because it just sort of reminded me, you talked about how there's this movement away from sort of email first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I'm curious about the data volumes that are being that we're seeing in the space as a percentage of overall data. Can you give us some sense of where collaboration data measures in terms of overall volume of data collected for eDiscovery?
Sure. I mean, the volume is really large, Mike. At the enterprise level, which is where most of our Hanzo clients are.
Mm,
Um, I remember going back. I remember in 2009, 2010. If you talk millions of emails and millions of anything, that was a lot of content. And today, that is, I mean, we're talking tens and hundreds of millions of messages flowing into the systems, and the volumes are quite large, and the collection of that data is quite large as well. So you of course have the message content, which can be quite small. So we're talking snippets or small messages that are going on, but the volume of that is very high. And then add on top of that things like the attachments that come into play too. So you still have that notion of a parent-child relationship that has to
right.
be dealt with. So you know the way we look at this is the volumes never go down. The volumes are always increasing. And in Slack, I've got customers that have 15 20 million messages in a single matter. And so the data volumes, yes, the data volumes are high, and we continue to see that. The best thing you can do for that, Mike, is really put a tool in place that helps people call that data down before they have to go collect it. And so that's one of the big advantages that we have with that dynamic map that I mentioned earlier. Is the idea behind this is don't collect all of your Slack content
Yeah,
if you can
I'm
help it, right?
obviously one
You
of the
need to
first
scale
goals
this
of
thing.
eDiscovery.
Yeah, you need to scale this thing down, right? And try the best you can to try to call that information down by any means you can. And so you don't want to have to go review 15 million, 20 million messages. Nobody wants to do that, or really needs to do that at the end of the day, if you think about it.
That's a great segue to my last question. And it was almost a year ago that I talked, or it might have been more than a year ago. I talked with Julian and Kathleen from Hanzo,
Hmm.
and when we talked with them, I was curious then. I remain curious now. Why do you think these collaboration tools have increased in popularity, and do you think that they might eventually replace email?
Yeah, I touched on this a bit earlier, but I do, Mike. Um, I see more and more, as I mentioned, startup companies who don't have the mentality of email first. And it's almost becoming more formal. Like the contract needs to go this way, it will go in email. Um, rather than having conversations in email in that format and style, right? So it's I've seen this transition of it's starting to become more of a formality if you're going to use email. But collaborative data, the companies like Slack and Microsoft, um, they've extended the capabilities so far into these collaboration sources that it's become the instant on for people. It's the way people work. I mean, text messaging and all of that. I mean, it's more instantly available to you for good reasons and bad reasons for people, right?
It's
But it's
economical.
there. It's always there. It's economical. Um, they built the tools and all the plugins to help you, work the way you want to work. And there's just been I think, just a massive shift in companies. Certainly, from what Hanzo sees and the companies that we talk to, um, there's been a massive shift in these areas, and you see less and less of email becoming relevant. And the data sources like Google Drive or OneDrive, certainly those are still in play because you've got to store file data and things like that. But for collaboration, I mean, it really is driving more toward a Teams and Slack centric world.
And it's been my observation too that there's a different level of responsiveness, if you will. Like sometimes you'll send an email, it might sit in somebody's email box, their
Oh
inbox.
yeah,
But send a Teams chat or a Slack message, and people seem to jump to it much more quickly. It's fascinating.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's clients that we work with where we don't send them email because they don't want to work that way. We have a Slack Connect channel to them, and we're able to talk to them in Slack Connect. And
yeah,
so it's changed the way we've done business, Mike, which is also interesting, right? It's not just the way other companies do business; it's the way a company like Hanzo does business too. More of our customers want to talk to us through a Slack channel. They want to
yeah.
collaborate with us that way. So you look at that. That's not a traditional way maybe a company like ours would work. But when we are onboarding clients, we ask them, do you want to open a Slack channel to us, because you can gain access to folks like engineering and our CS team, and even product that you might actually never really interface with unless you're doing QBRs and things like that. So it really has changed, I think, even the nature of the work a company like ours would do with a company.
Awesome. Well, this has been great, Dave. We're coming to the end here. Thanks so much for making time for us. Before we go, is there anything else that's new? Anything interesting? Any shows you're going to? Your next vacation? A good book you read? Anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'm going to New York in 2 weeks, Mike, and I'm afraid it's going to be cold. I'm trying to find my winter coat, but yeah, all I can say is stay tuned, Mike, because we have a new announcement that's coming in the next month or two, which is going to be, I think, really exciting for the Illuminate clients that we have. It's a new tool that's going to be Slack centric, which is very interesting. So we're going to be launching that in the next month or so, and we'll be talking more about that. So I'll say stay tuned. Of course, Legal Week next year. I think it's the next big event that we're at. But yeah, we're really excited about the next few months.
Excellent. Keep us in the loop. We're happy to help you amplify that. This has been great. Where can listeners go to learn more? How should they contact Hanzo?
Sure, Hanzo.co, as you mentioned, best place to start. Folks can reach out to me as well, of course. So I still have traditional email. So david.ruel@hanzo.com, I think. hanzoarchives.com, sorry, excuse me. And yeah, I'm available on Slack as well. So
fantastic. Everybody, Dave Ruel, head of product at Hanzo. Thanks for making time for us. If you are interested in our short form video interviews, you could find We Are ACEDS live in your LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook feeds, or check us out on the ACEDS YouTube channel, where you can watch previous interviews and live streams. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, of course, to our friends at Hanzo.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Alrighty.